Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a time, right? Crossing an entire continent took, well, not days, but months. A really perilous journey fraught with danger. Every single mile was a challenge. Then almost overnight, that changed to just a week. Think about that transformation. How did that even happen? And what were the lasting ripples, the seismic shifts of such an incredible change?
Welcome to Built Through Time, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're taking a deep dive into sources you've shared with us to uncover the incredible, sometimes surprising story of American railroads and how they fundamentally shaped the nation we know today.
It's truly fascinating, isn't it? Because we're not just talking about, laying tracks across a vast landscape, not just steel and wood. We're exploring a phenomenon that profoundly altered, well, everything. From how commerce flowed, how the environment was impacted, to our very concept of time, even national identity. The American railroad system truly was, and, continues to be, built through time. And what a journey it is. We'll explore the grand vision, sure, but also the grueling work that made it possible. We'll peel back the layers on the hidden costs, the controversies that definitely arose, and then track the surprising evolution of an industry that even now continues to be, a crucial backbone of our economy. So where do we begin this epic story? Let's maybe go to May 10th, 1869, Promontory, Utah. This was a truly pivotal moment in American history. You've probably seen the pictures. That day, Railroad Baron Leland Stanford drove a ceremonial gold spike, marking the joining of the Central Pacific and Union Pacific tracks. Now, this wasn't just symbolic. This 1,776-mile connection meant a trip from New York to San Francisco. Once a multi-month ordeal by stagecoach or maybe a long, dangerous sea voyage could now be done in just about a week. It's an astonishing leap in travel time, almost incomprehensible to us today.
It absolutely is. And what often gets maybe overlooked when we talk about this monumental achievement is the sheer human effort, the sacrifice behind it. This was a mammoth undertaking, costing an estimated $60 million back in 1860s money. That's well over $1 billion today, easily. But beyond the financial cost, think about the people. Roughly 21,000 workers were recruited for this. And it was a remarkably diverse workforce. You had Irish-American Civil War veterans, freed slaves, Mormon pioneers, and quite significantly, a majority of Chinese laborers. But here's the stark truth, often overlooked. Despite their vital contributions, these Chinese workers faced the harshest conditions and the lowest pay. It's sort of a foundational injustice woven right into the fabric of this grand achievement.
And when you dig into the details, the work itself sounds incredibly dangerous, almost unimaginable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe paint a picture? Just how brutal were those conditions?
Oh, brutal is an understatement, really. Imagine hand drilling through the unforgiving granite of the Sierra Nevada, literally averaging just a few inches a day through solid rock. Inches. Or picture being lowered by ropes on nearly vertical cliffs, they called them Chinaman's holes, grimly enough to chip away at rock faces for explosives. They'd light the fuses and then frantically signal to be pulled up fast before the blast. Any mistake, any delay, it could mean death. It's estimated as many as maybe 1,000 workers died from accidental explosions or just tragic snow and rock slides. The landscape was utterly rugged, conditions primitive, extreme temperatures, harsh mountain winters with avalanches, brutal summer desert heat, sometimes up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
1,000 lives. That's a truly sobering figure. It really underscores the sheer brutality of that work. And even for those who survived, the conditions were still incredibly harsh, especially for certain groups, like you said.
Precisely. The Chinese laborers, for instance, they were paid maybe half to two-thirds of what Euro-American workers earned. And on top of that, they had to pay for their own food and lodging out of those lower wages. But here's something powerful, a counter-narrative. In the summer of 1867, thousands of these Chinese workers organized the largest labor stoppage in America up to that date. They demanded equal pay, better conditions. Now, their demands were ultimately denied. The railroad bosses withheld food, threatened violence, but this showed these workers were far from passive. As researchers noted, the companies learned the Chinese couldn't just be taken for granted. They fought for their dignity.
Right. So what does this all mean for the nation then? What was the bigger impact of this iron spine being laid across the country?
Well, as the history professor James P. Ronda put it so well, the railroad brought the West into the world and the world into the West. Think about California. Once pretty isolated, a remote outpost, really, it rapidly became a major economic and political force. Huge growth. And this wasn't just about moving people faster. By 1880, the Transcontinental Railroad transported an incredible $50 million worth of freight annually. That's $1880. It facilitated, well, everything. Japanese tea imports landing on the West Coast, rapid transport of Western crops east, manufactured goods going west. This rapid commercial expansion had really laid the groundwork for the U.S. to become the most powerful economy on the planet by the 1890s. It was a truly transformative moment for the young nation. And yet, as we connect this to the bigger picture, this rapid expansion, while undeniably transformative, it came with profound social costs. Environmental costs, too. For instance, the government granted millions of acres of land to railroad companies, much of which, in reality, belonged to tribal nations. Tracks were literally laid across 15 distinct tribal homelands, directly displacing indigenous people from their ancestral territories. Just pushed aside.
That's such a stark reminder, isn't it? The other side of that progress coin. And it wasn't just land, was it? It also led to the devastating decimation of the buffalo population. That was a crucial resource for plains tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne. Their populations, once in the tens of millions, fell to near extinction, just wiped out, mostly due to indiscriminate hunting by soldiers, railroad workers, even passengers shooting for moving trains for sport. This critically weakened indigenous resistance to Western settlement, making it easier for, new settlers to move in. And beyond that, the sheer amount of wood needed for tracks, tunnels, bridges, it devastated Western forests. Thousands upon thousands of trees cut down for ties, supports. The environmental footprint was just immense.
Immense. And with such monumental undertakings, the question always comes up. How on earth was this all paid for?
Right.
And what were the financial costs beyond the obvious human and environmental ones we've discussed? Well, early railroads relied heavily on debt for their initial growth. Lots of borrowing. Figures like Cornelius Vanderbilt and Jay Gould, often called robber barons of the Gilded Age, that period of huge wealth, but also, frankly, rampant corporate corruption, little government oversight. They pioneered new and often deeply controversial financial models. Vanderbilt famously used his control of the Albany Bridge, the only rail access to America's largest port at the time, to effectively, strangle competitors. He just barred rivals from using it, watched their stock plummet, then swooped in, bought their shares for pennies on the dollar before reopening the bridge. Solidified his control. It was ruthless, but incredibly effective for him.
Wow. It almost sounds like a movie plot, doesn't it? These larger-than-life figures with so much power, so little oversight. Jay Gould is another name that often pops up when we talk about this era, and not always in a positive light. What made him so controversial?
Oh, Gould was absolutely notorious, really known for his unscrupulous business practices. He and James Fisk, for example, they conspired to illegally corner the gold market in 1869, caused the infamous Black Friday financial panic, ruined countless farmers, bankrupted established Wall Street firms, just chaos. After that, he took control of the Union Pacific in 1873. And what's remarkable is how he immersed himself in every single detail, operational, financial. From setting rates to managing logistics, he essentially built his own vast railroad empire across the Midwest and West. By 1879, he controlled about 1/9 of the entire U.S. rail network. That's like 10,000 miles of railway. He was a master of financial manipulation, strategic acquisition, really knew how to play the game.
And it sounds like some of these financial practices had long-term consequences, maybe unintended ones, even for the railroads themselves.
Absolutely. Definitely. One of the really fascinating insights from financial history is this practice called tunneling, which is basically defined as the transfer of assets and profits out of firms for the benefit of those who control them, taking money out the back door, essentially. The infamous Credit Mobilier scandal, late 1860s, is a prime example. The Union Pacific basically paid a construction company, which was conveniently owned by its own controllers, its own directors, 84% over the actual cost for building sections of the railroad. 84%. This kind of self-dealing, often financed by more debt, it imposed huge financial burdens on the railroads right from day one. And these problems, this sort of deeply ingrained indebtedness, contributed to repeated financial crises throughout the 19th century, started as early as 1857. These structural issues, they persisted. They even factored into the widespread Great Depression-era railroad bankruptcies of the 1930s. The problem of railroad debt was, as some historians said, rooted in a distant, murky past.
Okay, so this era of largely unregulated capitalism with its robber barons and financial machinations, it eventually led to a push for oversight. Makes sense. And this is where the government stepped in, right? 1887, the Interstate Commerce Act creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, made railroads the first U.S. industry subject to comprehensive federal economic regulation, a big step. But this, too, came with its own set of challenges, not always the intended consequences, as you mentioned earlier.
That's exactly right. What's so striking here is how the pendulum swung perhaps too far the other way. Excessive regulation. For example, the ICC setting rates that were often completely unrelated to actual costs or market demand, just arbitrary numbers sometimes. Or even preventing important innovations, like the use of Big John cars, these huge, high-capacity freight cars for grain shipments, or unit trains, long trains carrying just one commodity directly from origin to destination. Super efficient. These innovations would have allowed significantly lower rates, made railroads more competitive, but the ICC often blocked them. It really hampered the industry. Now, by 1917, rail mileage peaked at a staggering 254,000 miles, employing 1.8 million people more than any other single industry. This wasn't just a number, it was the undisputed zenith of an era, marked the absolute dominance of rail, which makes its subsequent dramatic decline even more surprising as it faced new challenges. And then the Great Depression hit. That economic collapse just slashed rail industry revenue by 50% between 1928 and 1933, led to nearly a third of total rail mileage ending up in receivership by 1937. A third.
Wow, it's hard to imagine something so dominant falling so far, so fast. And despite their absolutely crucial role in World War II, moving 90% of Army and Navy freight, over 97% of military personnel, the decline continued into the post-war era. By the 1970s, railroads were truly at the brink of ruin. Intense competition from federally funded highways, waterways, combined with huge losses from passenger operations. Amtrak was finally created in 1970 to take that burden over, but the damage was done. Led to widespread bankruptcies, service abandonments, billions in deferred maintenance. Things were literally falling apart. You hear terms like standing derailment when rail cars literally fell off poorly maintained tracks while standing still. That became alarmingly common, and it just sounds like a totally desperate situation.
It really was. The status quo was simply untenable. Something had to give. So this raises that important question. How did the industry survive this near collapse? Faced with either nationalizing the entire system, which was a very real consideration, politicians were talking about it, or trying a different approach. Congress passed the Staggers Rail Act in 1980. They chose balanced deregulation. This pivotal act allowed railroads to largely decide their own routes, their services, their prices. It fostered much-needed competition, innovation, and crucially, it explicitly recognized the need for railroads to earn adequate revenues to actually support their operations. Maintain the tracks, invest. It was a radical shift, yes, but a necessary one.
And the result of that shift has been truly remarkable, hasn't it? A complete rebirth for the industry, you could say. America's freight railroads now operate almost exclusively on infrastructure they own and maintain themselves, investing over $810 billion of their own funds since 1980. That's huge. It's in stark contrast to other modes of transport, like trucks or barges, that often rely heavily on taxpayer-funded infrastructure, roads, waterways. And as a result, average rail rates are an astonishing 42% lower than they were back in 1981, adjusted for inflation. Makes them way more competitive. And the last decade, safest ever for U.S. railroads. Beyond that, they're incredibly fuel efficient, moving a ton of freight, nearly 500 miles per gallon of fuel. Think about that. Significantly reducing highway gridlock, greenhouse gas emissions. In 2023 alone, freight rail contributed something like $233.4 billion to the economy, supporting nearly 750,000 jobs. It really is a kind of phoenix from the ashes story, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The story of American railroads is just one of continuous adaptation. From that ambitious construction that literally unified a nation through periods of exploitation, financial turmoil, to facing near ruin and then reinventing itself in a truly profound way. It really reminds us that even the most enduring structures in our society, the things we rely on, they aren't static. They are constantly being rebuilt, refinanced, reimagined, built through time.
So as you go about your day-to-day, maybe think about this. What enduring systems around you right now, perhaps those you take for granted, those foundational elements of our modern world, are still in the process of being built through time? And what hidden costs or maybe overlooked contributions might be part of their ongoing story, something to think about?